last time, what we did was we took the data they entered in the form and we made an object out of that, right? We made that person object, or at least I did in my version of the homework. And I said it wasn't too important to follow along because you're going to do it yourself. You're going to do it yourself right now. So inside handle submit, instead of just creating a variable called flick name, let's make a variable called flick. And that's going to hold all the data, all the data for our flick. So when we add more things to the form, we're just going to add them to this flick object. So anticipating more than one field eventually, I'm going to actually save event target to a variable again, const f for form equals event target. And right off the bat, yeah, I'm going to give it a name. So name colon f dot flick name dot value, right? But let's also give it something to uniquely identify that thing. Let's give it a counter, like an auto-incrementing index. So I'm going to give it an ID, as though this were some sort of database. So I need some sort of counter. So how can I do that? How can I make it something that gets larger each time? What I want is the first flick I add, I want it to have an ID of 1. The next flick I add, I want it to have an ID of 2. The next one, 3, etc. So I need to keep track of the highest number that I've used, right? I can't make that a local variable inside handle submit, right? Because as soon as it's finished running the first time, that variable goes out of scope. We can't do that in this format. What we could do is make it a property of the object itself. So we could do that. We could actually say like max ID colon 0 started out at 0 or whatever. Or same thing inside a init, we could say this dot max equals 0. Same effect, right? We don't have to have declared that property already. It'll create it as soon as we assign it. So that starts it out as 0. And then every time, we can just set ID to this dot max plus 1. And then increment it. So we'll make sure that at the very end, we increment it. This dot max plus plus. Now it is this dot max, not just max, right? It's a property of the object, and I'm inside the object. Piece of cake. Let's watch it work great. Refresh. Type. The island, the one that didn't make any money. Explode! What? Line 17, flick name is not defined. Line 17. I was like, well, yeah, of course it isn't. Flick dot name, how's that sound? Refresh. Bad Boys 2. Bad Boys 2. Yay. Let's check out our, let's check out the whole flick object. Check out our ID. Refresh. Bad Boys 1. ID, Nan. Sweet. Bad Boys 2. ID, Nan. Nan does in fact stand for not a number. Why is it not a number? So we said this dot max equals 0. Why 0 plus 1 is a number? What's going on? No, just the one time. So this dot max, we set this to this dot max. Wait a minute. What's this? There, I don't. Let's just double check ourselves here. Inside handle submit, let's do a console.log this. Oh, it's the form. So here's the thing about this. It doesn't necessarily matter where you make the function. What matters is how you call the function. So we called init ourselves down here with app.init. So we called it method style. We used method invocation to call it by saying this dot something parentheses. That treats it as a method and binds this to whatever that object was on the other side of the dot. How did handle submit get called? It got called when something happened, right? We didn't call it. It got called when an event fired. So when a function is acting as an event handler, this is always bound to the object on which the event occurred. It's going to be the same as the target. Great. Remember that. This is bound to the target of the event if that's how the function was called. Doesn't matter that it's a method of an object. That's not how it was called. Thankfully, there are ways that we can override that behavior. You can manually bind the value of this to something else. It might seem a little weird, but when you refer to the function up here, remember the function itself is an object. You can call .bind on that and pass it as an argument. All functions have functions. All functions have methods called bind. And if you pass it something, that thing will be the value of this inside that function. So it returns a new function with the value of this bound. So what do we want to bind it to? Yeah, what's this inside init? It's the right thing, right? So if we bind it to whatever this is at this point, that'll be the right thing. We'll do this a million times. I can't promise it'll ever make sense, but I hope eventually you'll at least get used to the pattern. That line's getting just a tad long. I'll just put my arguments on several lines. So when it's submitted, run handle submit, but run a version that has been bound to the value of this. We already have event target if we really need the form, right? We don't need to get to it through this. Refresh. Transformers, 1 billion. Yay. What? Okay, ID 1. Name, Transformers, 1 billion. Oh, there's a console log on line 13. Yeah, right. So that's the value of this now. It's the object with a max and a init and a handle submit property. Sweet. I'll get rid of that console log. We'll leave this one here for now because we're not doing anything else with it. Cool. So what have we done since the last time? We created a flick object with a name and an ID. Create a flick object with a name and an ID. One more tiny thing before the homework.